First of all, I would just like to thank the Williams Lake Indian Band for allowing us to meet here on their territory, and thank Chief Willie Alphonse and the Council, Heather McKenzie, Chris Wycott Sr., and Joan Sellers, and Ann Louie. Thank you very much for your good work that you're doing as leaders in this community. And I'd like to thank everyone here for coming out today. I know it's been probably a long journey for a lot of you, and really appreciate your interest in the First Nations Forestry Council, and I'm happy that you're here today. Thank you for taking the time. So today our presentation will focus on 4 areas. We'll do hopefully a short introduction to the Mountain Pine Beetle Working Group, as well as provide information on the First Nations Forestry Council, do an update on the federal funding, and also provide some information about the eco-stewardship planning, which is what we are now calling the First Nations Land Use Planning Initiative. As you know, in response to the federal government's funding commitment for the Mountain Pine Beetle funding, the Leadership Council called for a meeting with all impacted First Nations. I believe one of the most important things is this topic here, is accountability, because at the end of the day, when the 3 chiefs leave their post, they want to make sure that whatever structure we put in place is accountable to First Nations. We don't want to set something up and have somebody go on their merry way, and we want to make sure there's an accountability structure framework set up. Group 1 is over there, Group 2 is over here, and 3 is over there.
Should we have more than 15 people sitting on this advisory board?
Would that work?
I think that's the idea, is based on that success and the new relationship document and all of that. They want to bring it up just a level so that it doesn't focus just on Mountain Pine.
Is there a guarantee how long this whole group will be? Or are you mandated to come up with a strategy within certain years? What was the criteria over funding for long term?
We're not appointed by the current provincial government or the federal government. We're being funded initially by them. And in that funding agreement, all it says is that we have to have something strong set up in structure. So they want to know where this money's going. They want to know how it's being spent. But they don't have any control over this group's existence.
What do you guys see as a priority for in our area? We call it Brittany Triangle. They wanted to address that beetle infestation that was huge in our area. We had a roadblock. There's no logging in the area, and right now you're right in there. It looks like a healthy forest here. The beetle attacked it. There was a lot of red timber. Now there's no red timber. It still seems to be a good, healthy forest. So I'm just wondering if maybe that'd be a priority for the council to look at other areas throughout the world where the beetle attacked and the different strategies that were used, and maybe some areas that weren't touched. What was the outcome?
Well, I think too that we've had epidemics within Canada itself.
Yeah.
Back east, there was a
in the history.
Yeah, there's huge beetle attacks in eastern Canada, and I was involved in that.
We wanted to negotiate a forest and range opportunity, and I know there's work going on that. We're not sure exactly what the state of the art in it is in the eyes of the First Nation Forestry Council. But we're asking for things that they say, well, we need legislative change. We need they're saying to us, well, that's something we'd have to run through First Nation Forestry Council, they say. And it's splitting range fees and range management, co-management of range. We don't have that in the chokehold. We don't have even the basis of a new relationship. And we don't have a forest and range agreement. We have a forest agreement that they get to sign off on range too.
Here's what I got was for the council to become a lobbyist, and this would be lobbying whether it's for more money from different forms of government or licensees, a lobbyist to influence more on policies. When there's policy changes, we need more First Nations input to take care of our concerns, and become more of a lobbyist within First Nations, within ourselves, and put that word out there. We need more education. We need to build capacity, which alludes to our next priority was develop capacity in First Nations communities. Before we can do anything, you know, we're putting the cart before the horse. How can we do this if we don't have educated people? And so become more of a lobbyist for that, an advocate, or is more of a correct term, I guess, is to develop an education in First Nations communities, especially those ones that are isolated and those ones that are really affected by such things as a mountain pine beetle. You all know in the southern central interior that this effect of the mountain pine beetle is going to have adverse effects to your communities. Another strategic goal is planning, an ecosystem stewardship plan. So how is that going to affect and cover off our land use plans? And how to deal with another issue is forest stewardship plans. So we need to develop a strategy of, even though we weren't there in the development of forest stewardship plans, so how can we, is there an alternative process for that? Another issue was consultation. So how do we deal with such issues as the referrals process? How can we change that so we can get a grip on everything that's occurring on the land? And consultation that is not only proper, but to the right person or right department, but that is meaningful, that if they are consulting us, they're going to do something about it and address our concerns. And one of the last ones here is gain more jurisdiction on the land, whether it be through joint management with other governance, provincial or federal, and licensees. How do we gain more jurisdiction? And what is our role as First Nations within the whole government structure? So these are what you guys' concerns were?
I facilitated the visions, missions, and values breakout sessions, and some of the common themes that came through and that people agreed with in this section were, and they're not in order of priority, I wrote them down so they're all of equal importance, is that one of the things that the people seen that would be a very important value or a vision of the First Nations Council was to ensure that communications happen between First Nations at the regional levels, to ensure that we did a lot of networking with each other, and that would help us build our capacity, and then we could avoid duplication and redoing things. Everyone was very much in agreement that the value of the First Nations Forestry Council, that they would act as a watchdog for different government initiatives, that we would also lobby for policy change, development, and legislative change, that we would be more proactive in our approach. Some of the stuff you'll find is very similar to Terry's, but we'll find that through the strategic planning exercise. And that it's very important that we recognize that we have different values, that we see things not like Kofi sees them, but we see things in more of a holistic value, that we see more than just trees in the forest, that we see the animals, the water, and everything in between, and that value needs to remain. And for the First Nations Forestry Council not to become a delivery agency, that we would work with existing First Nation institutes, whether it would be community development centers, tribal councils, the FNFC, whoever, that we would work with them and that we would monitor them and their progress, and we would try to work together and we would complement each other in terms of like the new relationship dollars. And that the First Nations Forestry Council should be providing tools and identify best practices. These should be shared, posted on the website and shared amongst each other. And some of the best practices that we talked about exists right here in this region, and that's with TNG and what they're doing with the referral systems. And some of the new things that came up today that didn't arise from any of the other regional meetings was that the First Nations Council should assist with dispute resolution, help us to work together, help us to develop cooperative agreements whenever, like we may have overlapping interests, we may have overlapping territories that are out there, that to help us work together. The government has been very good at helping us work against each other and sees the council as a real organization to pull that together. And that we should be looking at lobbying for the government to develop incentives for sustainable management. And that the incentives would include incentives for the existing companies, that maybe they would get stumpage concessions, maybe they get green points, but there is an area legislation that they could look at supporting them with. And so, and that summarizes, there was a lot of things said. I think I had like 15 or 20 pages that I wrote down, and those will be posted on the website. Christy will be putting them out there, and I just wanted to say thank you for your input, and thank you.
The second group proposed maybe that advisory council isn't as accountable as we thought it was. Maybe having only 15 or 18 different First Nations represented just wasn't good enough. And maybe the way to do it is if we were to follow the same model almost as these regional meetings are being followed, we're going to put staff members in that region and make those people accountable to the communities that they're going to be working and living in, and then dually accountable back to the First Nations Forestry Council. So that's kind of, it's really interesting to us, it's really interesting to me, that we basically take the resources that we talked about with that Forestry Policy Advisory Board and put those resources into more staff members. These would be full-time positions. These guys would be mandated directly to work with those 15 or 20 bands, whatever is there. They would be responsible for knowing the issues and getting those issues back to the First Nations Forestry Council so that they can do something about it. And then, once they have the resources to do something about it, they would assist the communities in implementing the tools that are going to work with those type of things, work with fuel management, work with riparian issues, work with streams increasing their temperature, those kind of things. And then the idea was that we would have the Leadership Council here, but that really it's our job to be accountable directly to First Nations. The Leadership Council would be involved, but that an annual general meeting then comes back, similar to the forum that took place in Prince George, where we collect all 200 people together and say, this is what we've done, this is the issues that you identified in your communities, here's the personalities that we've put in place that you asked us to do, how's it going, how are we doing? So there's a direct line of communication that way. To keep administration costs down, it's suggested that these positions be under contract and that they be under one-year terms with an option to renew. The last group had some concerns about that if these people were trying to, maintain their job, if they wanted their job for the next year, that they may kind of become politically minded. So rather than dealing with issues, they may find themselves campaigning. So we decided that these guys should still report to the executive director. The executive director would be in charge of managing how this group would operate, and then he or she would be the person that would have the direct line of authority there. The other interesting thing, I think, is that we lost, if we were to strike the advisory group, we lost the advent of having an elder and a youth represented. So there was the thought that probably elders are not interested in full-time jobs, but maybe we could have a list of a few, and maybe that would be this person's responsibility, is to find out who the elders are in the community that are interested in forestry, and then from time to time invite them along to meetings. And make sure that we have a small fund available for an honorarium if they were available and wanted to participate, and the same thing with youth. So today, what was interesting is that we introduced an entirely new model. We discussed the first one and then came up with this one.